Welcome. My name is Brian Marin. I'm a partner in the law firm of Spotts Fane. I'm here today as Vice President of the Greater Richmond Bar Foundation. We're pleased to co-sponsor this event and to welcome you here today. This series will be distributed to law schools, libraries, and universities around the country. And now, Dean Smolla and Chief Justice Carrico.
Well, welcome everybody to the University of Richmond. I'm Rod Smolla, the Dean of the Law School, and we'd like to welcome all of you for this conversation with Justice Harry Carrico. Chief Justice Carrico, as he's fondly known to most of us who've practiced law in this state, the Chief is what we'll always think of you as, was on the Virginia Supreme Court for decades and the Chief Justice of the state of Virginia for decades. He's lived a remarkable life as a lawyer and as a jurist, and he's here today to talk to us. Chief, I'm going to ask you about why you became a lawyer and your years on the court and the things that you've seen in our profession as it's evolved over the years. We have folks in the audience from the general public. We have many lawyers that have practiced in this state for years. We have law students that are just starting their lives in the law. And we want to get your thoughts and reflections and your wisdom on the extraordinary life that you've had in the law and how you see our profession moving. So I'm going to start with the simplest question. Can you remember when you decided you wanted to go to law school?
Well, I wanted to be an engineer and build bridges, great big bridges. I dreamed of them. Nothing interested me any more than that. But when I got to high school, there was a young teacher. Well, it was a brand new school, and she was one of the teachers there. Her name was Martha Reilly. She came from Middletown, Virginia, up in the valley. And the American Legion and the Evening Star put on an oratorical contest every year. And I got in that and won it. And Miss Reilly decided I should be a lawyer rather than an engineer.
So you were hooked by now. You were going to become a lawyer.
Right.
Yeah. And you went to, what year did you start law school?
Well, I graduated from high school in 1933, which was the very depth of the Depression. All I had was a $175 DuPont scholarship to go to UVA. I went to Charlottesville, tried to find some work, couldn't find a thing. My brother was there, he tried to find me a job. And I finally landed a job and with a title and insurance company. It was a one-man operation. And I was to be the secretary. And he asked me, could I type? I said, yes, sir. You take shorthand? I said, yes, sir. You keep books? I said, yes, sir. Now, if he had asked me how well I did those things, I'd have been in a little trouble.
This is an interviewing tip for our students.
Right.
Yeah.
I got the munificent salary of $12.50.
A week?
A week.
$12.50 a week.
A week. And with that, I enrolled in what was known as the Washington College of Law, which you could do right out of high school. It's a nice little school. It's now the law school of the American University. But that winter, Virginia put on a requirement that you had to have an undergraduate education to take the bar. And I didn't want to practice anywhere else in Virginia. Washington College of Law was at the southeast corner of 20th and East Street. George Washington University was at the southwest corner.
Right.
So I just walked across the street and enrolled in GW. It took me 8 years to get through the college work and the law school. And
so
all the time I
you started your law school career in a way before you started your college career? Is that...
Yeah, I had.
Yeah.
At the Washington College of Law.
I see.
And if the Virginia had not changed its rule,
Right.
I could have taken the bar
Right.
after 3 years at
Right.
Washington College.
Now, tell me the story. After you graduate, you start practicing. How did you become a judge? You became a judge as a pretty young man, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, by the time I graduated from law school, I was working for a lawyer in Fairfax. examining titles. And I had an early morning settlement and went across the street to record my papers when it was finished, and ran into a buddy who was raised on the farm next to the one I was raised on, and we chatted. And he says, "Harry, are you going to be interested in that judgeship?" I said, "What judgeship?" He said, "Didn't you know that Judge Ritchie died this morning?" I said, "No, I've been tied up in my office, but I don't have any chance at that." So I went on in to record my papers, and the chief deputy came in and saw me. He says, "By the way, Mr. Whalen wants to see you." Mr. Whalen was the clerk. I was scared I'd done something wrong, was in trouble. And he says the same thing. "I want to see you get interested in this judgeship." I said, "Mr. Whalen, I don't have any chance at it." He said, "Well, how about letting your friends worry about that?" Well, back in those days, the judge of what is now the General District Court was appointed by the Circuit Court judge. And we had one Circuit Court judge for all of Arlington, Alexander, Fairfax, and Prince William. Now they got so many Circuit Court judges up here, you couldn't help hitting one if you fired a gun. I did not know him, and he didn't know me. So I made an appointment and went down there. And he wasn't there when I got there. And he sat me in the courtroom. He had to go through the courtroom to get to his office. And he finally came into the door and just sort of went like that at me. Went back, and I had to wait a long time before he called me in there. So I go in, he says, "Have a seat." And I said, "Well, Judge McCarthy, I think you understand that I'm a candidate for the judgeship in Fairfax. And I realize you don't know me, and I just thought I'd come down and ask any questions that you might have for me." Long, long pause. "Nope, can't think of anything." So
That's usually a bad sign in an interview.
exactly. I tried to think of something, and I finally says, "Well, I thank you for seeing me. If I can give you any information, I'd be glad to do it." Anyway, I went back to Fairfax, went to see my friend Paul Brown. I said, "Paul, Judge McCarthy not only doesn't know me, he doesn't like me." Well, I had a buddy who was an old retired Marine captain, didn't have anything to do. And he got me some petitions signed and sent them down there. And finally, after 6 weeks, this went on for 6 weeks, I'm working in the record room one day, and Mr. Whalen, the clerk, comes. He says, "Harry, Judge McCarthy wants to see you." Well, I looked at Mr. Whalen trying to get a reading, you know. It was all bad. He really did. We walked the whole length of the courthouse, and he didn't say one single word to me. And I figured I was just being led to the slaughter. Judge McCarthy says, "Sit down there." And I mean in that sort of a tone. And he starts in about what a mess this thing was in. Says, "The Bar Association met. You got the endorsement, but only by one vote, so it doesn't mean anything to me." And then he starts on my age. And one thing I could say, I was 26 years of age.
You were 26.
26. I graduated.
He has a legitimate point, I have to say.
Yeah. I graduated June 8th the preceding year. This was in March, so I hadn't been out of law school.
1 year
for a
out of law school. Yeah.
But he finally says, "You know, I guess I'm the last person to hold your age against you," because he was the youngest circuit court judge in the state. So he says, "I'm going to take a chance on you."
And history was made. Yeah, you were 26 and you became a judge. And then I'm going to fast forward. You move your way up through various levels. And what year did you become a justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia?
1961.
And you were a justice for about 10 years before you became the chief, right?
20.
Okay. And then how long were you the chief?
Chief for 22 years.
And so overall, 42 years on the Supreme Court.
42 years.
All right. Now is that a world record? Do you know if anyone else has ever served that long in the Virginia Supreme Court?
I always thought that Judge Cabell held the record at 41 years. And Professor Morris, who was a professor of history here, wrote a little book about the court. And he said that up at the start of a paragraph. But down at the bottom, he talked about a fellow by the name of Fleming. The Supreme Court started in 1779, but it didn't have any judges of its own.
I see. We don't want to count that then. We're going to give you the record. We're going to give you the Cal Ripken jurist record here. Now,
anyway, from 1788, I'm the longest serving on the court.
That's good enough. That's good enough for us. Okay. I want to ask you now to reflect on that time. And of course, you still sit as a senior justice on the Supreme Court of Virginia. I want to hear the highlights and the lowlights. So first of all, as you think back on all those years on the court, what were the most meaningful and important experiences for you as a justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia?
Well, I guess getting accepted by my associates. I mean, I was young. I was the youngest one in 100 years. They were all experienced people, you know, and here I am, a little.
So you felt some resistance in the early days?
Oh no, I didn't feel it, but I was worried about the impression I might make.
You had to earn their respect.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you do that?
Well, I couldn't ask for it to have been better. They were just a wonderful bunch of people. Justice Buchanan from out at Tazewell wrote me a nice letter of congratulation, and it says, "We often disagree, but our disagreements are never disagreeable." That certainly has been the truth.
What, as you think about your time on the court, what were the hardest types of cases that you had to deal with? What were the things that you struggled the most over?
Death penalty cases.
Death penalty cases.
Yes,
and because you knew that life and death were in play and at stake?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What kinds of things would go through your mind in those cases?
Well, because you couldn't forget what the penalty was. And so we spent a lot of time. They generally were tremendous records, and you have to read every word in them because the word you miss might be the one that turns the case.
Do you read every brief?
Yeah, oh yes.
You read every brief yourself?
Yes, sir.
You read the underlying record that comes in front of the court? Yeah. You start to make up your mind as you're reading the briefs, or how does that process work for you?
Well, yeah, sometimes you see where you're going. But with me, it's not until I've gotten the opinion fairly worked out that I get settled on what I'm going to do.
How, you know, I like to argue cases in appellate courts, and appellate lawyers always wonder, is the justice's mind made up as you walk out on that bench, or does the advocate have a chance to change your mind? How would you?
Well, I can't speak for others, but I get a great deal of help out of oral arguments. Now, you know, there are some courts that have cut out, appellate courts, that have cut out oral arguments.
What do you think of that?
I think it's bad.
You think there should always be oral argument?
It should always have the chance to make oral argument. As I say, I do, and I think most appellate court judges do, get a lot from oral argument. I think it's very important.
Now I'm going to use a fancy word, jurisprudence, because it's often fashionable to ask a person who's been on a court for a long time, tell me about your jurisprudence, tell me about your judicial philosophy. And you hear people say, well, I'm conservative or I'm liberal. Sometimes it's even put in political terms. I'm a Republican judge or a Democratic judge. I'm an activist judge. I'm not an activist judge. I'm a strict constructionist. So I'm curious as to whether those labels mean anything to you as you think about yourself in your own career. Do they mean anything to you? And how do you think of yourself in terms of your jurisprudence, to use that term?
Well, I never think of those terms.
The labels don't even come to your
No.
mind, do they?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I've always had that sense.
What I want to do is find the right decision in this case on what's in those books and what's in the facts.
Mm-hmm.
But it would seem to me that you worry about things like that, it would detract you from what
Yeah.
your real goal is.
So your goal, you've just put it very beautifully and simply, your goal is to reach the right decision. Were there times when your heart would tell you one thing and your mind would tell you something else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not unusual.
And was there ever any doubt in your mind as to what you had to do in that situation?
Oh, yeah, I think there'd be doubt, yeah. You're confronted, it's not unusual, by something one or the others of the lawyers have done that complicate your problem. Maybe they haven't saved a point properly. And that might be the thing that turns the case.
So that must be extremely difficult if you can see
That's right.
that the better outcome would have been A wins, but A's lawyer has made a mistake, and that requires B to win.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yeah. Let's use that as the opportunity for you to reflect on lawyers a bit. You've seen thousands of lawyers come before your court. You've been an extraordinary figure in this legal community and nationally for a long time. You've known some of the most famous lawyers and judges and jurists in America. Describe for me some of the people that you've most admired or the characteristics that you've most admired in lawyers or judges that you've known.
Want me to pick one person?
You can pick more than one, but one would be, I'd be fascinated who the one person is you'd pick.
Lewis Powell.
Justice Lewis Powell. Tell us about
When
that.
he came to argue a court, he knew his case from beginning to end. He would take the time he needed. If that left time, so be it. He didn't waste a word. He left you with the most comfortable feeling that whichever way this case came out, it sure from his client's standpoint could not have been presented better.
Did you continue to have a friendship with Justice Powell when we went to the Supreme Court of the United States?
That's when our real personal friendship began. We couldn't be.
When he was an advocate in front of your court,
Yeah,
you really couldn't become friends. It was
we were friends, but we were not
but you couldn't become
social
You
friends.
couldn't be close. Yeah.
And he would spend his summers here, and we'd have lunch together. He was just a wonderful, wonderful person. He really was.
Well, I'm gonna embarrass you maybe, and I apologize for doing that. But it's no surprise to me. I suppose what I'm going to say is going to be true for a lot of Virginia lawyers that would be listening to this. That the two of you would find an affinity and a friendship, because in the eyes of most of us that have practiced in this state, you are the quintessential examples of the lawyer who was also a citizen and a gentleman. I mean, I can't imagine ever hearing a harsh word from Justice Powell, and I've never heard a harsh word from you, or never heard anyone hear a harsh word.
You just don't talk to the right people.
I guess I must. I guess I must not be hanging around the right folks. But I want to focus on you with regard to this, because there is this legend that you got along extraordinarily well with your colleagues on the court and with the advocates who would come before your court, even though you'd often have intense disagreements over things. What's the secret to that?
Well, cooperation, a spirit of cooperation. You could do anything if you get people to cooperate in doing it.
Let's talk a little bit about the relationship between the courts and our legal profession and the general public who are not lawyers. You spent a lot of time talking to folks who are not lawyers throughout your career. You're famous for doing that, for being very open and accessible, talking in high schools, college campuses, forums for people all over the state. Do you think the public has confidence in our system of justice?
Well, on the bad side of things, the ABA commissioned a survey of the public, and the great majority of the people responding to that said that they no longer believed that a lawyer was a leader in the community and a defender of the underdog and a seeker of justice. Only 22% of them said that the phrase honest and ethical describe lawyers well today. And only 40% of them gave lawyers overall a favorable ranking. They were ranked third from the bottom. Next to them were stockbrokers, and below that were politicians. Now that's pretty bad. Now, in our experience in Virginia, we began doing exit surveys. And the report came out one year, and I couldn't believe my eyes, that 76% of those who had had experience in court in the preceding year felt they had been fairly treated in the court. And I got Rob Baldwin, the executive secretary upstairs, and I said, this got to be wrong. You can't satisfy half the people. I mean, you're always going to have one side mad at you, and sometimes you have both sides mad at you, you know.
Right.
It came back the next year almost the same.
So that would be a signal that there must be something the Virginia state courts are doing well to give people confidence. Yeah. What do you think that might be?
That we were trying to do the job right. We were trying to make the courts more accessible. We're trying to make the procedures more easily understood and handled. And I think that is important in the public's mind. But I think we still do a lot more to build the public's confidence in the courts.
Right. We're coming to a close here, but here's what I am going to do. I want you to know that that speaking for me, and I'm sure speaking for tens of thousands of lawyers that have practiced in this state, you are an extraordinary hero to so many of us. You have stood up against all the forces that can make us small and selfish and crass as a profession. And you have stood for civility, you have stood for being engaged in the community, and you have stood for the great, great traditions of the profession. You have no ego. It's never been about you. It's been about justice and about serving the people. And that's been an inspiration for me as a Virginia lawyer. It's from the first day I came into this state as a lawyer. It's been an inspiration for me. It's something we've tried to pass on to law students at all of the law schools in this state, I know. And you talk about being proud of being a Virginian. All of us are, and you're one of the reasons that we're proud. And so, on behalf of everybody that's been part of our legal community, thank you for the wonderful life you've lived in the law, and thank you for sharing this afternoon with us.
Thank you.